Well, it's been a minute. Thank you all very much for all the great positive feedback we've received on the first couple of episodes of Guide to the Gridiron. Sal Capaccio with Erik Turner. We've had training camp, we've had preseason games, we have life. So we were finally able to get back together to put together another episode. Erik, thank you so much for all of your hard work on this. Really great response from people. I think they're enjoying what we're doing here and looking forward to a lot more here.
Yeah, the schedule worked out. We're finally able to record the third episode today based on a topic is going to be personnel groupings. It's something that all of us use. So we're, back in here, back on the grind, ready to bring you some of the nuts and bolts of this game.
Well, when I was growing up, I don't think I ever remember hearing 10 personnel, 11 personnel. I think it just became so much easier to identify who's on the field and relay that to, your personnel on the field, to relay that to your defense, especially so they know how to match up against the offense. But now with the advent of social media, with, all 22, with just everyone getting a little bit smarter and more in depth, it's such a regular part of our terminology, right? 10 personnel, 12 personnel. We have coaches talking about it. We have fans talking about it. We have people like you on your show breaking it down all the time at Cover One. So we're here to tell everybody exactly what those terms mean, what those numbers mean, and I hope we can, expand upon that a little bit here for everyone. But really is, as you said to me before we started recording, it's the foundation for every single play in an NFL game.
Yeah, because when you think about it from the offseason, when a coach is diagramming his playbook and really setting up his playbook, it starts off with what personnel is in the game, what personnel is he going to use, and how he's going to use those personnel players. So those numbers mean something when you're looking at the playbook, but those numbers also mean something once you get onto the field or trying to get guys onto the field, whether you're on the offense or defensive side, because the game's about matchups. It's about that personnel. And so we're going to break down what those numbers mean.
All right, so let's just get right into it and say, okay, when you hear something like 12 personnel, what does that mean? Well, there's two numbers there. Now, there's only 11 people on the field. All right. It doesn't mean the number of people on the field. All it means is, and let's remember back to what we talked about a couple episodes ago. All right. You have five regular offensive linemen. You have seven guys who have to be on the line of scrimmage at the snap of the ball. This all intertwines out of the remaining six players, because there's 11, okay, all of those players are generally eligible to catch passes. The first number that you hear when you hear personnel groupings is the number of running backs on the field. So if you hear 12 personnel, it's one running back. The second number is number of tight ends. So one running back, two tight ends for 12 personnel. We'll go over this in a little bit more.
Yeah.
But the reason why that's important is that leaves how many of the remaining eligible players. Well, obviously, you're not going to count the quarterback, right? So
Right.
there's two wide receivers remaining. You have your quarterback, you have your 12 personnel, one running back, two tight ends, and then two wide receivers. And basically, that's where you get 12 personnel from. So, really, at bare bones, basic stuff is first number is running back, second number is number of tight ends.
Right. And as I said, it means a lot. It's the foundation, right? Again, it comes back to coaching. It's the organization in the playbook. It's, hey, we need 12 personnel on the field right now. So one running back, two tight ends, and two wide receivers for the next play on the field. So they can, you talked about offline, you talked about, a lot of offenses nowadays use cards, and
Yep.
sometimes there'll be some kind of logo, icon, something where these young players can memorize, hey, when they see that logo or that diagram, they say, okay, 12 personnel needs to be on the field. Sometimes you hear coaches call it by Trey, Tiger. So they give it names so that the players know who needs to be on the field. And more importantly, again, it's a game of matchups. So if the offense is sending 12 personnel on the field, the defense has to know who they need to send on the field to match.
All right. So let's say you're watching a game in the sidelines. The Bills have somebody who does this. They hold up a card. It says 12. Maybe you're a defender who says, oh, that's not me. I'm a nickel defender. I'm an extra defensive back. Whenever there's 12 personnel, that's two tight ends for the other team. We're going a little heavier. We're bringing somebody else into the game. That's why it's important for those guys to know. Most guys aren't substituting all the time on defense, right? I mean,
Right.
Matt Milano's going to stay on the field the whole time. Tre'Davious White and Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. Really, what we're talking about is maybe a linebacker, maybe a defensive back, how they want to match up here. So let's start with why you might put these different groupings on the field and how the terminology goes.
All right, so let's start off with 21 personnel, all right? We'll keep it basic. This was a personnel grouping that was used for many, many years. But then spread football took over. A lot of the wide open offenses took over. But this is 2 running backs, 1 tight end, and obviously 2 wide receivers on the field. Not many teams run base 21 personnel anymore, Sal, as you know. It's a personnel grouping that was used for a focus in the power running game, downhill, smash mouth type football. But not many teams run it all that often anymore. I think the Ravens probably used it a little bit more in the last few years. Obviously, the Niners use it a bunch and kind of excel at it. They're probably the best team when it comes to 21 personnel. So again, 21 personnel, 2 running backs, 1 tight end, 2 wide receivers.
And again, want to just show those numbers that you have on the screen there that Erik put up. So 2 plus 1 is 3. You have 5 total. That leaves 2 wide receivers. So whatever the first 2 numbers are with the personnel package, 21 in this case, you just add it up. Whatever's remaining, that's the number of wide receivers on the field. So if you add up like the second one we'll go over, 1 and 1, 1 running back, 1 tight end, that's 11. How many does that equal? I'm sorry, that's equals 2, 1 plus 1, that equals 3 wide receivers. You got to get to 5 total. That's how many wide receivers are on there. All right. The other thing I want to bring up, 21 personnel. If it's a fullback, he still counts as a running back, right? So we're not
Yes.
we're not looking at the actual, well, wait a minute, Reggie Gilliam's a fullback on the depth chart. The teams will know. They'll say, okay, when they have this guy in the field, there's a fullback, Sam Gash back in the day, right? Even Kyle Juszczyk. Kyle Juszczyk could be a
Yes.
tight end, but that's why the Niners use this because he's actually a running back. He's listed as a fullback, but that counts as a running back.
Yes, again, it's all how, you prepare for that game plan. The Bills, for example, in years past, when they saw 12 personnel, they stayed in nickel with Taron Johnson most of the time.
Mhm.
Will we see a little change there this year? I think so, based on some of the personnel they have, some of the players they have on the defensive side of the ball, and teams they'll play with multiple tight end sets. So again, it's all about that game planning portion. How do you want to match up? Again, how do you want to match up versus that offense?
All right. And then the other part about this, look at the wide receiver numbers. I just want to make it clear. This can be an outside receiver, a slot receiver. Remember the episode we did? We talked about the X receiver, the Z receiver. These are any wide receiver. It doesn't matter if you're in the slot or it doesn't matter if you're outside, right, Erik? It's just basically that's the number of wide receivers remaining who are eligible. They're not giving them a special number on this.
Right, right. It's just the number of receivers in the game and everyone else kind of, falls into place. It's not where they align. It's not any type of formational thing. Sometimes we do videos and we talk about personnel. We'll say 11 personnel or 12 personnel. And then people will comment and say, hey, there's only 11 guys on the field. It's not 12 personnel. So again, this is why we're doing this. We want you guys to be able to understand the language that you hear from us, whether sales on the sideline or you're in the film room with us. We want to break it down and keep it simple for you so that you can speak the language.
All right, so 21 personnel, something you don't see as much anymore, a lot more power running. Something we do see a lot of now is 11 personnel. Again, what do the numbers mean? 1 running back, 1 tight end. That's 11, 1 and 1. That equals 2. That remains 3 wide receivers remaining, I should say, to get you to 5. This is more of a spread formation.
Yeah, no doubt. And in today's NFL, this is kind of that base offensive personnel grouping, 11 personnel. The Bills were in 11 personnel 72% of the time in 2022. That was 6th overall. I mean, they were second in yards per play out of 11 personnel at 6.5, and they scored 15.88 points, which was first overall in the NFL out of 11 personnel. It's a very balanced attack. You can do a lot of different things. And again, if you get the type of personnel where you have 3 wide receivers and you can get a guy that is kind of a hybrid receiver running back, like say Debo Samuel, it does create those mismatches again, but you're still in many ways in 11 personnel. So again, it always comes back to the players and then the personnel that the coaches are using.
And this is when you'll most likely see defenses in nickel. Even teams that don't run a
Mhm.
lot of nickel, they might run nickel against 3 wide receivers. You have to match up because if they stay in base personnel on the defensive side, that means with an extra linebacker. Now you're going to get a wide receiver matchup
Yeah.
against linebackers, which is what you want.
Yeah, no doubt about it. This is why the game is great, right? The personnel matchups and the mismatches that the coaches try to draw up on paper and bring them onto the field and get ready for each game. It's what makes this game great.
All right, let's go to 12 personnel. This is something the Bills are going to run a lot of this year. They've been talking about it. I would say they've really wanted to run it the last few years, but it didn't work out with
Yeah.
OJ Howard or Jacob Hollister. You go back to Tyler Croft, maybe they ran a little bit more when he was involved, but they've wanted to go to this personnel package. In fact, Brandon Beane said when they had Cam Newton in Carolina, his rookie year, they were very good at running 12 personnel and really putting teams in a bind because they had Greg Olson and Jeremy Shockey, 2 tight ends. So 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends, that leaves 2 wide receivers, obviously, because 1 plus 2 equals 3.
Yeah, and the tight end position has changed as we talk about the Y tight end, the F,
Mhm.
the move tight end. The players are changing at that position. So they're not just in line like a Y, traditional Y tight end blocking all the time. They're a lot more athletic. So when you get these 12 personnel groupings, back in the day, people would think, they're going to start running the ball, but it's a lot more balanced and versatile nowadays because of the tight end position and how it's evolved. And this is going to be one of those personnel groupings, as you said, the Bills want to run it more. They've been trying to run it. They just haven't had the correct personnel to do it over the years. But I think the league is also kind of trending towards that way because, as you said, a lot of the defenses want to stay in nickel as their base defense. Well, adding a tight end out there, that can give you an advantage on the offensive side of the ball because you got that bigger tight end who can catch and run like a wide receiver, but also is that bigger physical guy because he is a tight end and not a slot wide receiver. So I think the future when it comes to how the game is trending. And, in the preseason for the Bills this year through 2 games, they've been in 2 tight end sets 35.6% of the time. That was 7th overall this preseason. 38 plays in all of last year. That was 32nd overall in 12 personnel. So 1 running back, 2 tight ends. And they averaged 5.2 yards per rush when they were in 12 personnel last year, which was 2nd overall. So again, adding a guy like Dalton Kincaid, who we'll talk about a little more because he's kind of one of those tweeners and hybrid guys. But when you have him and Knox on the field, you can create different type of mismatches that we haven't seen from this Bills offense.
It's also important to remember, just like wide receiver, a tight end, to be considered a tight end, doesn't have to have his hand down on the ground to block. A tight end's a tight end. So when Dawson Knox runs into the game, the defense identifies him as a tight end. The Bills will
Mhm.
identify him as a tight end, but he could flex out. Same thing with Travis Kelsey. Just because he doesn't have his hand on the ground doesn't make him not a tight end. He's still a tight end. That's how he has to be treated. That brings us to something that Brandon Beane said when they drafted Dalton Kincaid. So, not to be too confusing, but he called it 11 and a half personnel. And really, it's just kind of a funny way of saying, hey, it is a tight end. He is a tight end. He'll be on the field with Dawson Knox. That's 2 tight ends, but we kind of are going to use them more like a wide receiver. But Erik, at the end of the day, it's still 12 personnel. It's just how defenses choose to treat that 12 personnel with Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox.
Right. That's going to be what is so interesting about this season when they try to. It's going to become part of their identity. I think it's safe to
Yep.
say that 12 personnel, 11 and a half personnel is going to be part of their identity and a huge part, especially when you look at what Kincaid has done so far in his career. As you said, it's going to be interesting to see who they send on the field. Are they going to send on that nickel or slot defender? Are they going to send on a third safety? I doubt they'll send in a linebacker, but again, it depends on the defensive system. It depends on each week, and that's going to be what is so fun to see about this offense. And again, there's not much film on the Bills doing this, so that is one thing that they have in their favor.
Yeah, and if you watch the game on Saturday, because we're sitting here, we're recording this on after the Steelers preseason game. If you watch the Steelers preseason game on Saturday, boy, Erik, I'll tell you, you can't put a linebacker on Dalton Kincaid. I think teams are going to be forced to pretty much put a nickel, put a DB on him. And sure, if they want to run a linebacker, take their chances. But man, that is a great matchup for the Bills.
Yeah, and like we said, it's a balanced attack when you have that type of player in Kincaid and Knox coming onto the field in those 12 personnel sets because again, you can spread him out. He does most of his damage from the slot in that 2-point stance, as you said. So he's very much like a wide receiver. And if you watch his route running, you pretty much call him a wide receiver. He's that good and that smooth in his route running. So it'll be interesting to see, okay, if they send a nickel defender in, we'll bring him into the box. And yes, does he need to work on some of his blocking? Absolutely. But he can do it in space and you can do some things to outflank the defense with a guy like that.
What about some personnel packages that really are a little bit more uncommon? 10 personnel. You might run something
Right.
like that. That's one running back, no tight ends, right? So what would that look like and why would teams run it?
Yeah, this is something that during Dable's, regime as the offensive coordinator with Buffalo, he kind of majored in it, and I think he had to because, as we talked about, the Bills haven't had multiple tight ends that he could get on the field. So, one running back, 0 tight ends, and 4 wide receivers was a thing the first 2 years of his regime, and it's more of an emphasis on speed, and a lot of those wide receivers they were putting on the field were of the smaller variety, kind of the Smurf variety, but quick and fast, and so you're trying to emphasize speed. You're trying to get those get into space with some of that speed and that spread offense. But more importantly, you got to think about from a defensive perspective. When you put that many receivers on the field, how are they matching it? More times than not, you're going to see obviously nickel, but maybe even some dime with some safeties or extra defensive backs on the field. Or, instead of 5 DBs, you're going to have 6 or more. And so you can do that. And Dable did a bunch. I think they were second overall in the first or second year when Dable was here when it came to this personnel grouping. If you get all those DBs on the field, that gives you some opportunity to crease the defense when it came to the run game. So you're making them lighter with the personnel that you put in the field and how they're matching it. But then you're also being able to run the ball from that. And it's something that it worked really well for the Bills those years because they didn't have a big offensive line and they didn't really have the tight ends or multiple tight ends to put on the field.
One thing they have done in the past, not anymore, when they had Lee Smith, especially, sometimes you'd even get a third tight end on the field. You get an
Yeah.
extra guy out there, a third tight end. That's something obviously that would happen in short yardage goal line
Goal
situations.
line.
There's going to be different defenses for that anyway when teams get down there, but it does have to be treated as such. If there's 3 tight ends, you got to get a little bit bigger on defense.
Yeah, I mean, and Lee Smith, he was categorized as a tight end, but many people joked and said he was an extra offensive
Yes.
tackle because he was that good as a pass blocker. But even Dable was able to scheme up some things, as you said, in that low red zone, in the red zone, to get him open for touchdowns. So again, he was another chess piece, but kind of in the opposite direction, right? And just again, how are you going to match up versus that guy when he comes on the field? Tight ends are so important to these personnel groupings and to the game nowadays. As you can see, some of the most dangerous weapons are at the tight end position, which is why they're included in the personnel grouping numbers.
Yeah, and the Bills this year, with obviously Knox and Kincaid, we expect them to run a lot of 12 personnel. I think Quentin Morris is really good for this too. I think Quentin Morris has had a really strong camp in preseason. We saw some things he could do last year. And because they're going to run a lot of 12 personnel, firmly expect them to keep at least 3 tight ends. But I think Quentin Morris is an interesting player for this as well this year for them.
Yeah, former wide receiver. I was pretty impressed last season when he did get on the field and run some routes. He's got some really nice routes, having played that position out wide. So he's something, something he has to work on is the blocking, of course, but that's okay. And like you said, if this personnel grouping with multiple tight ends is big part of their identity, they're going to need depth there as well. And I think Morris has come a long way under Rob Boris, and I think he's still going to continue to trend upward.
All right, so 5 guys on the line of scrimmage is your center, your 2 guards, your 2 tackles. The next one is a tight end. Then you could have another tight end if you want. You got wide receivers. Let's remember again, 7 guys have to be on the line of scrimmage, and that leaves 6 eligible players. I'm sorry, 7 guys on the line of scrimmage. Out of those 7, you have 6 total eligible because the guy's on the end, but one of them is going to be a quarterback. So let's make sure that everybody remembers you got to have the adding up to 5. If you have
Right.
11 personnel, that's 1 plus 1 equals 2. That leaves 3 wide receivers. What else could teams do? Oh, here's a good question that people ask me sometimes. All right. Well, what happens if it's a guy that's kind of a hybrid and he winds up as an H back, or he lines up as a off the line of scrimmage, just like a wing back? I guess my answer to that would be that's tendency, right? You're gonna, as a
Mhm.
defensive coordinator, as a defense, you're gonna say, okay, when this guy's on the field, that's what they normally do. So this is how we treat it.
Yes, and again, that's slightly different because you're talking about alignment and usage, and each team's going to be different. And so, yes, it comes back to film study, it comes back to tendencies, but we don't want to confuse again formations, alignments, and
Yep.
usage with simple personnel groupings. Again, the foundation to the playbook, the foundation to substitutions, the foundations to adjustments.
All right. And then on the Bills side of things, if you look at them from the defensive side before we wrap up here, it's a good look at them and how they use Taron Johnson. Taron Johnson
Mhm.
is a nickel corner, but he stays in the game when teams go a little heavier because he's such a physical nickel corner.
Yeah, and his development in that area has been so much fun to watch because he's a guy that didn't really do a lot of that, play in the box, play on the fringe of the box, and fill versus the run in college. And he is just like a third linebacker. And a lot of people joke that he is a third linebacker because he can fill so quickly and fire his gun from that second level and fill sometimes in the A gap as if he is an inside linebacker. So he is a special type of player. There aren't many nickelbacks or slot defenders that do what he does in the box as a run defender across the league.
So 11 personnel, 1 running back, 1 tight end, 12 personnel, 1 running back, 2 tight ends, 21, 2 running backs, 1 tight end. You can do all these different things. At the end of the day, first number is running back, second number is tight end, whatever it adds up to, you subtract from 5. That's how many wide receivers remain on the field. I think it's pretty easy, hopefully, for everybody to understand. But of course, we're here if anybody has any questions to hit us up on Twitter or wherever.
Yes, again, we're trying to slow the game down, let you guys understand the language that we use on a weekly basis, whether sales on the sideline or you guys are in the film room watching some of our breakdowns. It's the foundation to football. And so we thought this would be a great, great topic to cover.
All right, Guide to the Gridiron. You can find it on the YouTube channels. Cover One is where Erik is posting his over at the Cover One YouTube channel. I just threw a link up on my Twitter as well. My YouTube channel is Sal Sports. We're going to transition on the next episode. I'm looking forward to this. We're going to transition to the defensive side. We've done 3 episodes on the offensive side. I think my most favorite episode we're going to do is talking about techniques. We're going to get to that on the
Yeah.
defensive side. But we had a great question come in on Twitter the other day asking us to explain what makes someone a Mike or a Will or a Sam, why they're called that, middle and weak and strong. So we're going to do all of that on the next couple episodes, which should be pretty cool.
Yeah, again, back to the basics, right? Where guys are aligning. What's a 3 technique? What's a 5
Yep.
technique? What's a wide 9 technique? We're gonna cover it all. We'll get to pretty much everything. Any of the questions that you have, send it to us in the comments, whether it's on social media or on our YouTube channels. We'll eventually get to everything. We'll try to cover, with some of the basic and foundational stuff when it comes to the game.
All right. At Erik J. Turner, I think that's what it is, right? On Twitter. Erik J.
Absolutely. Yep.
And Erik with a K, by the way, at Erik J. Turner, at Sal Sports on Twitter. Short and sweet today. We hope you enjoyed it. Till next time on Guide to the Gridiron. Check us out on either YouTube platform.